Is Ursula unmuted?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Oh.
I had to give a quick reminder to the family.
Oh. Fair enough.
Where are we in? So is everybody admitted?
So far, anybody that's come into the waiting room, yep.
Excellent. So it's 6:31, and we have at least our first speaker already here. So let's get started, yeah? Tonight we have a series of guest speakers on the topic of protecting voter rights. So we've been hearing a lot, especially today, about what's going on in Texas with voting rights being attacked in their state legislature and the attempts that they're making to push forward federal legislation, which we've been talking about for a few months, but it might just be coming into most people's awareness right now. But this meeting is really timely because that's on the top of the federal minds right now. So with that, let's get started with our first speaker. We ask that you put all of your questions in the chat, and we'll get to the chat as each speaker concludes their presentation, so we can have that immediate dialogue right away. And with that, let me introduce Marzi. Please let me know how to pronounce your name, because I neglected to ask you.
No, you're good. Marzi, yeah.
So Marzi is our first guest speaker. She is the voter protection organizer at the Wisconsin Dems and is thrilled to be helping lead the first ever off-cycle voter protection team in the state of Wisconsin. She has worked in organizing and voter protection in 4 states, including 5 elections and a recount in Wisconsin and the Georgia runoff election, which is dear to our hearts. With 2022 quickly approaching, she is more dedicated than ever to supporting and empowering voters and volunteers everywhere to use their voice and protect voting rights. She is planning to update us on what is happening in Wisconsin to support voting rights. And I have to say, I do have a unique connection because I spent, I think, 4 or 5 years living in Madison. So I very much appreciate you're in one of my favorite towns in the world.
I love to hear that. I'm in Madison right now. I've not been here for all that long, about a year, but I love it here so far. And I love that we have that connection. Yeah, thank you so much. I am so excited to be here. And yeah, so I've been working with the Wisconsin Dems voter protection team for just about a year now. And have honestly loved every second, despite some of the chaos of the election last year. But I am so glad that you all are doing this, that you all are taking the time to talk about and spread the word about why we have to be active to protect voting rights right now and not wait until October of 2022 to get involved in this fight. And I wanted to take you through just a little of kind of my approach and thought process to voting rights, particularly in Wisconsin, because as Ursula probably knows, we've got a bit of a unique situation here with just the dynamic of our legislature and some of the voter suppression laws and the fight against that. And I think you mentioned Texas, which has been on my mind a lot lately as well, talking to my counterparts there as they do everything they can to stop those voter suppression bills from passing. And voting rights has been in the news in so many ways lately, obviously with the Supreme Court decision, that decimated the Voting Rights Act, with the VP, President Biden speaking lately. This issue is getting so much national attention, which is exactly what it needs. But what I think about every single day is, where exactly does this work happen? And it happens here. It happens with all of us. And I think you all know better than anybody that organizing and advocating and doing the work is not really flashy or fancy. And it's really tempting to want it to be that, because voting rights deserves that kind of attention and it deserves, that approach from everyone. But that's not exactly where the real work lies in this issue. The work is in the trenches, which it sounds like all of you know very, very well over the last, year or even 5 years and more. And this work is really hard. And I always want to start, when I talk to folks like you, just acknowledging that this is hard. We are fighting an uphill battle with this. It is not easy to put yourself out there volunteering. It's not easy to take time out of your day, your family, your work schedule to do this, but voters need us. We have to do it. And sometimes this work also happens at a bit of a snail's pace. And as I'm sure you all know as well, you talk to 3 people in an evening of calls, and that's a success. That is a success in my book and all of my colleagues as well, because you add that up over time, over months and years, it becomes talking to hundreds, thousands of people, and that leads to us winning, as we've seen in so many ways over the last year. And so Wisconsin in particular, though, this is really how I approach our work here, and kind of as a case study for voting rights everywhere. I guess to set the stage a little, we lost Wisconsin in 2016. Trump won the state by about 22,000 votes. And Biden last fall won the state by 20,000, a smaller margin than we lost by in 2016. In Wisconsin, those margins even out to about 2 or 3 votes per polling place. And that is, I don't have to say twice that is an absolutely minuscule margin to be working with here. Everything about that is uncertain for every future election. And I do also want to back up a little to pre-November, pre-win, pre-President Biden, to our April 2020 election. And if anybody is from Wisconsin or was around last spring, you'll probably remember the massive shortage of poll workers that we had here during our spring election last year. In Milwaukee in particular, in the city of Milwaukee, they only opened 5 out of their 180 polling places to serve a city of nearly 600,000 people. That is 4% of the polling places they need. And voters were waiting in lines of 8, 9, 10 hours just to cast their vote in a Supreme Court race that actually decided the balance of our state Supreme Court between liberals and conservatives. So it was an incredibly important race, but people were waiting all day because of the massive shortage of poll workers. And that is something that our team, and I know a lot of you helped us with last year, is to combat that. And so after 6 months of work, we led up to the November election, where we had no poll worker shortages, thanks to what all of you did for 6 straight months, making calls, talking to people about getting involved in voter protection and in working in their communities on the election. And the election in November went incredibly smoothly here, but it is because of the work that all of you did. And kind of as I said before, this is the work. It is not easy. It is not flashy. It is making calls every single day and building our team of volunteers and talking to people about why voting matters, what photo ID they need, how to register, what is even proof of residence to begin with. It's answering thousands of calls on our hotline, which I know some people here did. It is talking people through, as a formerly incarcerated voter, how can they get registered and where do they go? If they are Spanish speaking, what are the resources, available to them? So many voters in this state just lack the support at every turn to easily and conveniently cast their ballot, but we're making progress because of the work that all of you are doing with this. And I guess the other thing that I try to remind myself of every single day doing this work, because it can get discouraging and it can get depressing, especially when the Supreme Court decisions come out that just, take another option away from us in the fight for voting rights. I just think about what can we do at this exact moment, on this exact day, or this week, or this month. And it's just keep at it. It is make voting rights and voter protection a part of your life. And, maybe that means scheduling a phone bank every week. Maybe it means scheduling a hotline shift or, working on social media outreach to educate voters. Maybe it means familiarizing yourself with a particular state like Wisconsin or Michigan or Illinois or anywhere around here that needs our help this year and next year. Just make this a habit, because we're going to need this next year. We are already in the ramp up to 2022. But the other reason I try to remind myself of that is just Wisconsin in general. We have a lot of news and a lot in the media about how our lawmakers and the laws they pass do not want it to be easy for people to vote. That is the last thing that they want. This state is gerrymandered beyond belief. I think it might be one of the most gerrymandered states in the country, and that is not going to improve anytime soon. And in 2022, we have two incredibly important races here. Our governor, who's a Democrat, is up for re-election, and of course, everyone's favorite senator, Ron Johnson, who's just truly says something absolutely insane every single day that shows that he is an insurrectionist and should not be in office. All that to say, he's up for re-election next November, and we have to vote him out. And the other, with our governor being up for re-election as well, that is kind of a deceptively important race because our legislature is so gerrymandered that it is solidly Republican. Our governor is the only person standing between Wisconsin and, our legislature passing laws equal or worse to Georgia or Texas or any of the other states that are seeing voter suppression legislation getting passed almost every day. Our governor is the only person stopping us from that happening here. And so that race scares me even a little more than the Senate one for next year. And so we do have a lot of challenges here. We have a lot that we are up against every single day, every single election. There's actually an election today. At this moment, polls are still open. We have a special election. But just to say that people are constantly fighting against the system that doesn't want them to succeed. And at the same time, though, we also have some of the strongest communities I have ever seen or been a part of, and the most wonderful people I've ever met here, people who waited in line for 8 hours last year to cast their ballot at the beginning of a pandemic when things were so unsafe and uncertain. They didn't let that stop them. They figured out how to safely cast their ballot. They waited all day, but they did. And we won that Supreme Court race, and we have won several voting rights cases in the year since, solely because we won that election for that Supreme Court justice. We have Spanish-speaking communities, Hmong-speaking communities, immigrant communities, students, older folks who don't let anything stop them. They find a way no matter what our legislature does, to make their voice heard. And it's honestly an honor to help support those people every single day in making their voice heard. And so some of the things we're doing this year, though, to support those exact folks, we are using this off year to kind of recalibrate everything we're doing, to identify all of the places that we have found our election system to be lacking over the last 18 months that we've had a voter protection program here. And one of those key places, as I mentioned before, is poll workers. We have a program going right now where we are recruiting poll workers in several target cities across the state that consistently have problems staffing their polling places adequately. And we are recruiting new poll workers. And that is something that we do 2 phone banks a week for. That is something we're going to be doing through this fall. We're also going to be doing some voter registration work later this summer. Thanks to our former governor, Republican Scott Walker, voter registration drives in Wisconsin are extremely difficult to do, but we have spent several months now figuring out how to structure our programs so that we can reach communities who are not typically reached by these kinds of efforts and get those people registered and get them familiar with the photo ID process and everything they'll need to cast their ballot. And next year, of course, we will be doing poll observers, hotline, phone banks, everything you can imagine to prepare for November. And we need a team of experienced and informed volunteers to help us do that. There is nothing, more important that we need than a team of people just like all of you to help us reach out to voters across the state. So that, I guess, for the organizers here, I'm happy to put our info in the chat if people want to see more about what we're doing. Let me know what's the easiest for that. But thank you for caring about Wisconsin. Thank you for caring about voting rights. And thank you for caring about voters that you have probably never met and may never meet, but you still care that they are able to exercise their voice and use their voice in every election, no matter how big or small. So thank you all so much.
And thanks for talking to us so much about what you guys have been doing in Wisconsin. I remember reading or watching a short video about dress rehearsal, right?
Dress rehearsal. Yep, that was about the Supreme Court election.
Yeah, that was incredible.
Thank you. I was not yet on the team, but I also watched that. I watched that documentary pretty regularly just to remind myself why we're here. Because it is, yeah, voters, my team, voters, volunteers everywhere gave their hearts to that election and just came out with a pretty incredible success that continues to be a success for us now.
Excellent.
Yeah, I guess if there are any questions for folks, happy to answer.
I don't see any questions, but this is Flo, and I have had some extensive experience volunteering in Wisconsin and meeting Marzi and, you know, the rest of the team. And one of the things that gave me the most gratification was the voter protection hotline. And I just want to do a big shout out to the Wisconsin Dems for the level and the intensity of their training. Because in order to serve on the hotline and in order to do most of what is required, once elections are, you know, in full swing, you really have to know what you're doing. And I think often people feel that they, you know, they don't know that law because they don't live in that state. But I am here to tell you that you can know it. And it is bizarre because there are some really wild things that are on the books, but they do a really good job of training. And I just want to applaud you for that.
Thanks, Flo. We try. It's definitely tricky with our laws, but we try to give folks as many resources as humanly possible when you're working on our hotline. And yeah, I think I saw a couple other names I recognize here, folks who might have been involved with our hotline or other things. And we are very grateful for you. We quite literally could not do this without you.
So Marzi, this is Linda. I did actually have a question, but I put it into the waiting room instead of to everybody on the chat. Anyway, so if you could put your information, or at least the link where people can sign up and see what the volunteer opportunities are.
Sure.
That would be perfect, so that people know how to, there we go. So
yep,
it's the link that people can use, and there's lots of choices. And it sounds like right now the main thing is finding poll watchers, and maybe in the registration, I assume that's going to be in person. Can people outside of Wisconsin help do those?
Yeah, there are not restrictions on, where you live being able to help with voter registration work or not. It will be mostly in person, but we will be having events around the state, including, Milwaukee, Racine, Kenosha, which I think are pretty close to where a lot of you folks live. So if you feel like coming up for a weekend later in the fall, I will have more information and dates on that very soon. And we would really love your help helping us get the word out. It'll be typically just like standstill voter reg events, as well as some targeted door knocking, though that's one of the tough things about voter registration in this state, is figuring out exactly who needs our help and where. But we are working on it, and we need your help to do it. We need your help to get people involved, because there are a lot of folks in that Milwaukee Southeast area who the system does not want them to get registered and easily cast their vote, but we are not going to stand for that.
Thanks.
Of course.
Well, thank you very much, Marzi. And I'm sure that you have recruited at least a couple of new volunteers here, or repeat volunteers, especially since it's so close and we can, a quick hour-and-a-half drive and you're already in Milwaukee if you're in the Chicago area.
Oh, that's closer than I realized. Geography is not my strong suit. This is why I work in politics. But no, I love that. But yeah, thank you guys so much for having me. I recognize several of your names, and I just, on behalf of my whole team and the whole Wisconsin Dems, just thank you for caring about our state and using your time to help us protect voting rights here. But thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, and thanks for teaching us.
Of course.
I think next up, we have Christine Morse. If she's here. I'm sorry, I'm trying to juggle too many things at once.
She is here, Ursula.
Excellent. So let me bring it back to her. But before I do, let me tell you a little bit more about Christine, since she is not from Illinois. She is a Michigan state representative for the 61st district, which is located near Kalamazoo, Michigan. And that, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's in the southwestern portion of Michigan, so the closest area to Illinois. She's currently serving her first term, having won resoundingly in 2020. Christine is a mother, a spouse of a Navy veteran, a former attorney, and a cancer survivor. As with other states, the Republicans in Michigan are trying to pass restrictive voter rules. Christine will share what's happening in Michigan and what we can do to help voters in Michigan win their battle to protect voter rights. So with that, let me grab Christine.
Should I go ahead?
There you are, good.
Everybody, thank you for that nice introduction. I first of all want to thank you, or thank Indivisible sort of as an organization, because they played a big role in helping me flip this seat. It was a crazy time to run a campaign, but our campaign, with the help of Indivisible and other organizations, made over 170,000 phone calls. And we ended up flipping the seat with 54% of the vote, a seat that had not been held by a Democrat for 102 years. So unfortunately, we had really high hopes for getting a majority in the House. We have a Republican majority in the Senate. We have a Democratic governor, and we were hoping to get a majority in the House. It did not happen. We flipped 2 seats. We lost 2 seats. So we were net the same as before. So 52-56. So the good news is that we have an independent redistricting commission that is working on drawing new maps, as we are also highly gerrymandered. And in 2018, we had a proposal that was passed by a resounding percentage of the voters to put into place this independent redistricting commission. We're a little hampered by the fact that the census data is so late in coming, but they've already done a listening tour of many cities and areas across Michigan, because they are looking to create as fair of maps as possible, which all leaves us in a little bit of a uncomfortable state because we don't know exactly what our districts are going to be. I am running for re-election nonetheless because I'm smack dab in the middle. So I got to believe it's going to be close. Anyway, the bad news in Michigan, though, is due in part to the tremendous use of absentee ballots and the fact that we also passed new laws regarding absentee ballots through, again, a voter petition drive. We vastly expanded the ability to use absentee ballots and the manner in which they can be used. Unfortunately, that has led the Republicans to decide to try to pass the same bill package that's being shopped around several other states that have conservative House and Senates and maybe, governors. So the Senate this spring introduced a 39 bill package of voter suppression laws. 2 have passed the House and Senate. Well, they passed the House and Senate for the first time. They're back in the Senate. I'm just going to kind of go through a list of some of these so you have an understanding of what we're up against. So Senate Bill 303 eliminates the affidavit in lieu of ID, which has been the law in the state of Michigan. So if you showed up at a polling place and you didn't have your ID on you, you could sign an affidavit that said, I am who I say I am, and still be allowed to vote. So what this law does is remove the affidavit provision and would require you to cast a provisional ballot. If you don't have your ID on you, you would have to go to the clerk's office within 6 days of the election to show your ID. The other provision under that Senate Bill 303 would require election workers to verify signatures at polling locations using an electronic poll book. Meaning, even if people have their ID and poll workers who are not really trained to be signature experts, if they decide that those signatures don't match, their ballots can be rejected. So, and there have been studies that have shown that there is bias that happens in those types of situations. So that is a really terrible provision that the House actually added. I've heard the Senate is not happy about that and will probably remove it because frankly, it means if people are showing up with ID, their ballot still might get thrown away, which is just silly on their part to even do that. But so those are Senate Bills 303 and 304. Just a kind of a note to that is in 2000, of the 2.3 million voters who cast a ballot, 11,417 cast a ballot without ID, which was 0.5%. Some of the other, actually the most egregious of, in my opinion, of the bills is one that would require those requesting an absentee ballot to provide a driver's license number or a state ID number, last 4 digits of social security number, or a photocopy of their ID. Now, a lot of people do not feel comfortable, rightfully so, with having those types of information details out there. And how many people have a copier in their home? Now, I do because I'm a candidate and I need to print things all the time. But it's, you know, that is quite a burden to put on people to say they have to go in search of a copier, pay for it. That is really a terrible, terrible voter suppression effort right there. Some others. Senate Bill 273 would enable county canvassers or the Secretary of State to remove or prohibit drop boxes if they don't meet unnecessarily restrictive, unrealistic, and unfunded safety protocols. 285 would require a photocopy of the ID to be included with the mailed absentee application, which is what I just told you about. Senate Bill 286 would ban drop boxes on election day, which just is insane. 287 would ban prepaid postage, which our Secretary of State did do with COVID and sending out absentee ballot return envelopes. So, and some groups funded these kinds of initiatives, which is also being banned. Senate Bill 309 gives challengers stronger protections than poll workers to lengthen voting lines and enable more improper challenges that would result in surely in disenfranchisement of voters. 310 prohibits the Secretary of State from sending unsolicited absentee voter applications or directly linking the application to the Department of State website. So you're telling me that in this time when people are expected to do everything online, that we're not going to connect the application to the Secretary of State website? Insanity. Senate Bill 283 provides only 10 hours of pre-processing for absentee ballots. The national best practice is 7 days. In the 2020 election, the legislature gave them 1 day to pre-process but not count. Senate Bill 296 increases the chances a canvassing board will fail to certify by enlarging and requiring a supermajority. You may have seen in the news that we had some real drama around our certification board, and actually one of them was removed because he was Republican and he voted to certify the election. I'm sure he had some death threats too, would be my guess. So all of these 39 bills, that's just a taste. You know, what did I didn't even read you a third of the bills. This is despite the fact that the Michigan Senate Republicans found no systemic fraud in the election in their investigation that they did. And as a part of that, they further urged the Attorney General to consider probing people who have made baseless allegations about the results for their own ends. The Senate Republicans still have offered all of these bills and are still moving forward with them as far as we know. So in some of that Senate Republican report, they concluded that citizens should be confident that the election's outcome represented the true results. So the really scary part about all of this is that reportedly Michigan Republicans are planning a petition drive that would take advantage of a loophole in Michigan law, which is part of our Constitution, which would circumvent Governor Whitmer's ability to veto this package. They would have to collect 340,047 valid signatures. And the Michigan GOP chair, Ron Weiser, has stated in the media that the GOP plans to pay the local county parties to circulate these petitions. They would have 180 days to collect the signatures once they start the process. And then if they get the signatures and it's approved, the legislature would have 40 days to consider taking up the petition. Now, we still have a Republican House and Senate, and this is a real threat. And we are all very concerned. We all are trying to keep attention on these issues in the media. We have voters, not politicians, here in the state of Michigan who actually got the voting changes in 2018. They're very active, trying to work to fight all these voter suppression efforts. And we, in the minority are doing what we can, but obviously there is an extreme, disinformation thing that's going on in the state of Michigan and other states as well. It's ongoing. You've probably heard of Antrim County. There's actually an attorney, Matthew DePerno, who lives in my district. I've never met him. But they keep pushing these false claims that there was some issue in Antrim County. Everything has been audited ad nauseum. There is no such thing as a forensic audit, which even, my other legislators are calling for, some of them. And, so we actually are poised to have a very fair system, but the question is it all going to happen the way it's supposed to, the way the voters wanted it to in 2018? And will we actually get the majority? Because our Senate is up as well. And I believe we have not had a Democratic Senate majority in over 40 years. So it's been tough around here, and being in the minority and seeing these things happen is really appalling across our country, especially when we know that the results of our election were not compromised in any way. So ways you can help. I know that's a question you asked. I mentioned it earlier. I know you all do this, phone banking to reach out to voters. I honestly will have to look into exactly who might have a program going. It might be the MDP, Michigan Democratic Party. I'm not 100% on if voters, not politicians, have some voter efforts happening already this year. I could hunt that down and get that back to Linda, certainly. But supporting candidates, if you guys identify, Michigan has been identified by the DLCC as one of the top to flip again. And so a lot of us will be working really hard. I'll be working to maintain my seat. We'll be working really hard to flip other seats. The Democratic caucus is already up and running with our, efforts. So I'm happy to answer any questions. Yeah, that's the state of what's happening in Michigan.
Thanks. That sounds like quite a predicament. It sounds a lot like what Texas is doing, and so there seems to be a lot of overlap. And I've heard that, what is it now, 13 states are in a similar situation. So I had a couple of questions about what you said. I don't see any in the chat, but I gathered some here. Does Michigan have same-day registration? Is that, yes.
Same day registration, same day voting. So you can walk in, register to vote, and vote on the day. Yes.
Awesome. And what kind of safety protocols are they asking for these drop boxes? Like,
it's like cameras on them 24/7. They have to be checked like so many times a day. I don't know. It's just ridiculous stuff. The fact is that, again, there are no allegations that were proven true. So it's just overkill, as we all know, to try to suppress the vote.
I think what they did in Illinois was they had one drop box in our county, like right by the county campus, that had like all of those things. It was bolted to the ground. It had a security camera, and all of the other ones were inside the early voting locations.
Okay.
So you didn't have to stay to vote, but they were constantly monitored because they were in the same area as people were coming to vote in person.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that would be a negotiating tactic for you or not, but that's what they did in our county. And I mean, I don't know about others, but I thought that was a fair compromise for security and accessibility.
It seems somewhat reasonable. I mean, the thing is, I live in a township, and I walked up to my township. I was at an event one day. I had it in my hand. I walked up, and it was like right in this little easy drive-through area. So, I mean, I don't know. I don't think your idea is like, yeah, if we have to negotiate, how can we make it so it's still pretty easy and accessible for people without severely limiting like the hours of the ballot box or, the days that they are accessible.
Yeah, I remember it was quite a drive to go up to county because I live in the far corner. And so for me, it was a 45-minute drive to get up to that drop box if I didn't want to wait.
That's ridiculous. I mean, that's voter suppression. What if people can't get a ride? What if people are old? They can't drive. It's no.
And for the petition drive that you mentioned, what percentage of the total Michigan population is that they're deciding that petition what overrides the governor's veto power, right?
Yes, I want to say, I just read it today. Don't quote me, but I think it's 4% of the governor's total from like the last election.
Wow.
I think something quirky like that.
That's impressive.
So there isn't a question or a statement in the chat. Anna, do you want to talk more about the Green Party?
Sure, I would love to. I need a no ETO little word on here. That's still going on. I see Ursula there.
Yeah. Oh, so for those of you out of staters, we had an industrial polluter in our bedroom community. And they had been there for about 30 years and nobody was the wiser. And suddenly, because an EPA warehouse happened to be down the street and they were, redoing the air monitoring for the country, it was brought to our attention that they were there. And so we ran a campaign for about 18 months, grassroots campaign to kick them out. Like we literally threw everything we had at every level of government, from our village mayor all the way up to the feds. And finally they said, okay, enough is enough. You guys are incessant. We are out. We're not going to fight this anymore. But we lived and breathed this for 18 months. So sorry, quick catch up.
Yeah, so maybe you could talk about what the Green Party is doing in Michigan as you know it.
I know a little bit in Michigan. We've been working with them. We do a lot of virtual phone banking. So it's on Zoom, so it's kind of friendly for crossing state lines. And so, yeah, they might be, I know that they're working on the HR1, SR1, because there's 4 points in there that actually hurts third parties. And so we're just informing people about that. And so phone banking, canvassing, so just basic stuff, getting ready for the campaigns, that's for sure.
Well, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
And Christine, if you get information about, whatever might be going on in Michigan as far as, potential for volunteering, if you could just send that to me and we'll make sure we'll get it to the people who signed up for this event and others around the area.
Okay, I'll make some inquiries and see what I can find.
All right, great. Thank you. Thanks so much.
We do love helping our neighbors when we can. So if we can get a couple of people here and there, every little bit helps, right?
Always.
So,
yes, always. Thank you.
Thank you very much for taking the time to join us tonight. And we are with you in solidarity.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Good night. Next up, we have Jared. I'm sorry, can you say your last name for me?
Yep, it's Jared Launius.
Jared Launius.
I can't believe you didn't know how to pronounce that. Unbelievable.
I'm sorry. I have a name like that too, so I don't even try. He is the Indivisible National Midwest Coordinator. He's the Senior Regional Organizer for Illinois, Wisconsin, and Michigan. So all three of the states that we've been talking about and where we live. Prior to his role at Indivisible, he worked for 4 years in various capacities for Swing Left, another organization that's dear to our hearts, including as an organizer for Illinois, Wisconsin, and Michigan. He's worked several campaign election cycles and also has worked on policy issues on Capitol Hill. Jared will help explain the voting rights bills that Washington is attempting to pass, where things stand today, and what else we can do as activists to keep fighting for voter rights. And I believe Jared has some slides to share as well. Is that right?
That's right. I'm going to try to share my screen here. Okay, can folks see that?
Awesome.
Right on. Thank you so much for the invitation. So I'm going to try to cover a fair amount of ground here fairly quickly. And I think that maybe some of this stuff will be review for folks, so that might be helpful. But please do slow me down, ask questions in the chat, etc. Because I don't want to sort of talk over anyone's head, but I also don't want to spend too much time talking about things that folks might already be super familiar with. So I was asked to talk a little bit about some of the federal legislation that Indivisible National and Indivisible groups across the country are rallying behind right now to try to put some federal guardrails around a lot of the voter suppression that we have been seeing run rampant in the country over the last year and years. So my goal for this very brief presentation is to basically just cover the substance of the bills that are moving through Congress and the political dynamics to kind of understand, what's happening with them, and then talk a little bit about what folks can do to continue pushing to move these bills. Before I get into the substance, I do want to just do a quick, I think that sometimes when we talk about voting rights, we sometimes sort of skip straight to the solutions and at our peril don't really always sort of reflect on the sort of the stakes of these fights. And I know that obviously, having heard from Representative Morse just now, as well as Marzi before, we've kind of done a lot of that on this call, so I won't hit this too hard, but just sort of a reminder of what has been going on over the last decade. I think that if I were to sort of summarize what's been going on over the last decade, it's that the modern conservative movement has become an anti-liberal, as in anti-small d democratic movement that is sort of losing all interest in winning elections via persuasion and waging campaigns that sort of are in the interest of sort of winning over voters, and instead they have turned their efforts into using legislation in the courts to essentially just over-empower their voters and disempower their opponents. None of that is new information to all of you, but I think if we look back over the last decade, we see a pretty grim picture, starting with Marzi talked a little bit about gerrymandering implemented in 2011 following the 2010 Republican Tea Party wave. She talked about Shelby County versus Holder, the Supreme Court decision in 2013 that effectively gutted the Voting Rights Act, ending pre-clearance requirements that sort of helped to keep at bay some of the worst tendencies of vote suppressing states. And then everything that's happened since then: voter ID, attacks on early voting, attacks on absentee voting, voter purges, foreign interference in our elections, people like Brian Kemp administering their own elections and doing all sorts of cruel things to abuse their power to win elections. And then obviously I could go on and on and on, but obviously, especially, I know this is particularly, we've all been paying very close attention over the last 6 or 7 months following Trump's big lie and the rash of voter suppression bills, like those just outlined by Representative Morse in states across the country. And this is sort of all boiling up toward a genuine emergency for our democracy. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the bills that are moving through Congress to try to address these things. But I think that a thing that I want to say, I think that sometimes we have a tendency to oversimplify things and sort of ascribe solutions as sort of one size fits all or silver bullet policies. And so I just sort of want to make sure that I'm establishing here up front that what I'm going to talk about is really important policy that we absolutely have to pass. Yes, and that, and everything that Representative Morse talked about, and everything that Marzi talked about. This is a multi-pronged activist approach that we have to take because there is no silver bullet for dealing with sort of the anti-democratic, anti-small d democratic impulses and actions of the modern conservative movement. So it's kind of going to have to be an all of the above approach. And I'm going to talk now about one big thing that we can do, which is to pass major federal voting rights legislation. So you all have probably heard about the For the People Act. This is HR1/S1. This is probably the single biggest swing that we can take at combating the voter suppression that we have seen, that we have been talking about on this call. I'm going to quickly sort of talk about the substance of the bill, because I know that's something that Linda wanted me to cover. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly because this is an absolutely enormous bill with a lot of provisions. But as we see it, there are basically four main parts to the For the People Act. The first bucket is voter empowerment and access. That universalizes things like automatic voter registration, same-day voter registration, early voting. It deals with felon disenfranchisement. It puts curbs on voter roll purges, like we've seen in states like Georgia, that very well may have impacted elections by purging incorrectly voters that are disproportionately Black, brown, poor, et cetera, that tend to vote Democratic. It establishes commissions for independent redistricting commissions to end gerrymandering. It has money funding for election security. So that's voter empowerment and access, that first bucket. There's also money in politics. It does all sorts of stuff around that. Public financing for elections to try to sort of reset the balance in terms of who has money and influence in politics. Tax incentives for small dollar donors. It increases disclosure requirements on dark money, cracks down on some different ways that rich folks tend to sort of hide and shield their political donations. So there's a lot of transparency work, ditto around the relationships between super PACs and candidates, all with the goal of reducing the influence of billionaires and millionaires and generally the very rich on our politics and trying to tilt it toward, more toward regular folks. And it also does a lot to sort of restructure and re-empower the Federal Elections Commission so that all of these new laws actually have enforcement teeth. It has ethics and corruption as another important sort of big bucket of what the bill does. And that sort of deals with government officials and at the sort of in the administrative state, in the legislature, in the judiciary, et cetera. It has provisions around financial disclosures requiring divestment from sort of major fortunes so that members of Congress and in the administrative state are not able to trade on their internal sort of privileged knowledge to make money. It expands conflict of interest laws. It does a lot to chip away at what's called the revolving door, which is sort of this issue where people go from working in government to big 6-7 figure paydays, working at lobbying, working in lobbying organizations or corporate boards or whatever the case might be. And it beefs up the Office of Government Ethics, again, sort of that enforcement mechanism. And then sort of the fourth bucket that Indivisible has identified is support for USPS. Basically, the idea here being preventing USPS from being weaponized and politicized to try to affect the outcome of an election, as we saw in 2020. So that's a very quick overview of the substance of the bill. I would definitely encourage folks to do some reading on your own because it's, like I said, it's really, really big. There's a lot of stuff in there. And so that's a very sort of high level summary. I'll quickly run through the timeline for S1/HR1 and how we got to the point that we are at now. So HR1 was the first bill introduced by the new Congress when Democrats took back the US House in 2018. It was the first bill that they put out. It has remained largely untouched since it was passed by the House in 2019. Then it was brought back up and made the top priority of the new House and Senate in 2021, once Democrats took control of both chambers as well as the White House. The bill was passed again by the House in March, which was no small feat. This is a pretty big, expansive bill. There were some conservative Democrats that were a little bit skeptical of it. And so the fact that it was able to pass the House as sort of live ammo, given there's now a Democratic president who could potentially sign it, was a big deal. It was given the S1 designation by Senator Leader Schumer, which means that this is sort of their top priority. And I will not go into all the details because I'm sure many of you are keeping up with these and there were too many twists and turns to even go into detail on. But basically from when it passed the House in March through June, there were all sorts of moving parts, senators coming out against the bill, senators coming out in favor of the bill, senators asking for changes to the bill, senators saying they're open to reforming the filibuster to make sure the bill can actually get passed, senators saying they'll never reform the filibuster to make sure it get passed. And that all culminated in the head just a few weeks ago on June 22nd, when Senator Schumer called a vote on the bill. And a very important thing, two very important things happened. First of all, every single Democrat, all 50 Democrats, including Senator Manchin and Sinema, two folks that have been the most conservative members of the Senate this cycle, two members who have been the most resistant to reform of the filibuster, two senators who were actually opposed at different times, especially Senator Manchin, to the For the People Act as written. They both voted for motion to proceed on the bill, which was basically a vote to move the bill to debate. So that meant that all 50 Democrats sort of voted in favor of moving the bill forward, if not outright voting for the bill. That was a pretty big deal for alignment of the caucus and something that was never assured, and that did not look like it would be assured even as much as like 2 or 3 weeks before the vote was called. So that's a demonstration, first of all, of just how far people like you moved the Senate in order to push them to get to that point. But of course, in order for a bill to move forward and actually reach debate, it must clear a 60 vote threshold, which means that 10 Republicans were needed in order for the bill to move forward. And of course, there are not 10 Republicans that support this bill because the only way for them to win elections is to suppress the vote. And so the vote stalled out there. I will not do a whole bit on the filibuster right now, unless folks think that we need it. Maybe I'll come back to it at the end if there's time. But suffice to say, the filibuster is just a Senate procedural rule that can be changed, but that as of right now prevents most legislation from moving forward unless it has 60 votes. And so with all Republicans opposed to the bill, it stalled out for now. Senator Schumer came out after that and said this is not the last time this bill will be up for debate, that we will see this bill up again, which is, again, very important. He needs to be pushed and pressured to not just let this bill die and to keep fighting and to treat it as the emergency that it is. And then after that, senators, after June 22nd, senators returned home for June and July recess. And people like you, many of you were directly involved in the Deadline for Democracy campaign that Indivisible National was a big part in organizing. This was the largest Indivisible National campaign in history, 350 vote events across the country in 40 states and the District of Columbia, folks showing up in one voice to say failure is not an option on voting rights. And even just today in Philly, this is Indivisibles in Philadelphia who showed up outside of President Biden's speech on voting rights to make sure he heard loud and clear from them that it's not enough to just say, I want to pass this or we need to pass this, to actually go all the way and say it is time to end the filibuster and do everything we can to pass this legislation because it is that important. So what comes next on HR1/S1? This is a really crucial period that we have now entered for this bill. So there's a lot of things that folks can do to keep fighting for this. A date that I want to put in everyone's mind is August 16th. That is the day that the Census Bureau, I believe it's August 16th, right around there at least. The Census Bureau will send census data to all the states so that they can start drawing their legislative maps, which is done every 10 years following the census. In order for the gerrymandering ban, in order for the sort of gerrymandering portion of the For the People Act to be implemented, we have to have this bill in place before that data goes out. That gives us basically a month to sprint to the finish here to pass the For the People Act, because after that, the calendar's gonna get crowded. And so this is literally basically a 1-month sprint to get the For the People Act passed in the Senate. So you're probably asking yourself, well, what can I do? First of all, I know that many of you were involved in Deadline for Democracy events over the last few weeks. That fight has to keep up. We have to keep the pedal to the metal on this and not let the bill sort of fall off the radar, to not lose any sense of urgency. Don't call Senator Manchin or Senator Sinema. They do not care about what progressive activists in Illinois think. And in fact, it would probably mean a lot to them to spite you, because that makes them look good for spiting progressive out-of-state activists. Keep calling your senators and ask them, what are you doing to put pressure on the holdout senators to reform the filibuster and pass the For the People Act? We want to see folks like Senator Durbin, folks like Senator Duckworth, folks that are in blue states that have no reason not to be going to the mats in this fight. We want to hear from them. What are you doing? There's also opportunities to call constituents in West Virginia and Arizona to ask them to call their senators that are holding out, Senator Sinema and Manchin. So there's opportunities to do that as well. I can get folks information that are interested, and we sprint to the finish. So keep the pressure up using the same tools that you have been using. I loved the sort of the call-a-thon that Linda helped to organize over the last few weeks. That work has to continue. We cannot let up, because this is, we call it the deadline for democracy, and really and truly it is. So that's a quick rundown of HR1. I know that Linda also wanted me to speak about HR4, so I will quickly speak about the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. The John Lewis Voting Rights Act is a forward-looking bill. It would not affect sort of anything that's already happened or has been passed, which the For the People Act would. But looking forward, it would essentially restore the provisions that were struck down from the Voting Rights Act by the Shelby County decision in 2013. It would reinstitute pre-clearance so that the worst actors have to go through the Justice Department first in order to make changes to voting laws, which creates a really important safeguard against future attacks on voting rights. So these bills are both super important. However, the reason that we're focusing on the For the People Act first is because it comes attached to a much more significant deadline than the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. And so we will likely pivot to the John Lewis Voting Rights Act a little bit later in the year, likely September, maybe October, maybe late August, depending on what the Senate calendar ends up looking like. So keep that in the back of your mind. Make sure your senator supports the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. The one thing I will say about that is that we don't anticipate there being quite as much difficulty ramming Democrats on this particular bill. There are even some Republicans that might be interested in co-sponsoring this bill, although we doubt it will be enough to get to a filibuster-proof majority. And so that's why it's super important that we start with S1, the For the People Act. We use that as a vehicle for getting voting rights and ending the filibuster, and then hopefully that will make it a little bit easier to get the John Lewis Voting Rights Act passed afterward. So that is my bit. I know that we are probably running a little bit low on time here, but are there any questions that I can answer about these bills? And or if anyone would like me to do a quick 1-minute explanation of what the filibuster is, I'm also happy to do that as well, but I know that you all are really plugged in and probably know that stuff quite well.
Jared, I put the link to the digital toolkit, Freedom to Vote, in the chat. I'm wondering if you have anything to say about it, how we might use it. So I'm reading through this right now. It's quite substantial. This is great. So this looks really great to me. I think yeah. I mean, think about all the tools that you have in your kit for applying pressure, not just to your member, and thinking about sort of where your leverage and power is. Right, your leverage and power is with your member, and in reaching out to voters in states that are in in sort of those battleground district or states where there are more holdouts, to have them contact their senators. Obviously, events that sort of get news attention and press attention, members of the Senate are not going to like to see folks that are ostensibly their supporters in their state calling them out. So keep up all of that work. I don't want to comment too much on this document just because I haven't had a chance to read through it. But yeah.
And Jared, this is Linda. Are there any, do you know of any phone banking to, West Virginia and Arizona?
Yeah, those phone banks are happening. By the way, I'm sorry if you just heard my beagle barking in the background. So those phone banks absolutely are happening. Linda, I'll send, I don't have those links super handy right now, and I want to check to make sure that we are running those actively right now. I believe we are. I can send those to you to forward along though.
Okay, that'll be helpful.
Great.
All right. And unless there's other questions, we probably should move on. Anna, did you have a question?
Yeah, I had a question. I understand that there's 4 main points that hurts third parties in HR1, and one of them is moving that contribution for campaigns for the candidates from 5,000 to 100 million. And like I did work with Represent Us for a while on the People's Act. It just didn't have enough bite for me personally, but that kind of limit that goes like per candidate, so it just to me invites more money. And I know like some of this stuff discloses it, but it doesn't limit it. So I just wanted to remind people, just, you know, as Jared said, be informed, you know, at the Greens, and there's third parties out here that there are 4 points in there that will hurt us. So I do want everybody just to be informed about that, but thank you for your time.
All righty. That goes toward pretty much everything we do. It's be informed and pressure our representatives for the points that are important to you above all else. I mean, we would love to get everybody on our message, but it's important that you make this your democracy, right? And with that, I think let's transition to our last speaker for the night, Renato Mariotti. Did I say that correctly?
Yeah.
Hi, Renato.
Hi, how you doing?
Renato is a local attorney, a legal commentator, and a former federal prosecutor. He's been seen on various news stations covering various legal issues. Renato is currently a partner at Thompson Coburn LLP. He is an accomplished trial attorney who represents a diverse group of clients in many types of complex, high-stakes litigation, including securities class actions, derivative-related claims, and cyber theft. And with that, let me give the screen over to Renato to tell us what he's here to tell us.
Yeah, well, I just look up what I think what my goal is today is just to talk to us a little bit about the interplay between the For the People Act and state in the state efforts to curtail the vote. I mean, we've been seeing now in a number of different states, right? We just heard in Michigan, we've heard in Texas. I think all of us are following, I think, what's going on in Texas. The efforts by Republicans to restrict the vote. Ultimately, what we can do to solve that problem or to curtail that problem is going to be trying to get passage of the For the People Act. And the reason I think that what, for example, Jared was urging us to do is so important is because not even if the For the People Act as a whole doesn't pass, which, and I agree, Flo, by the way, amazing info from Jared, it has so many different component parts that are important, right? So for example, the For the People Act contains contains a really important element of campaign finance reform, where, there's actually going to be matching money 6-for-1 in the For the People Act to ensure that, for example, small money dollars get magnified. So if you or I give $5 to a candidate, it suddenly becomes $30. It's going to have a tremendously important impact on elections. Gerrymandering. In Illinois, thank goodness, we have maps that are fair, but that's not going to be the case, right, in other states where we have maps that are gerrymandered, like Texas, right, gerrymandered to ensure that there's a massive Republican majority. So, ultimately, this fight is going to be a fight that, if we don't have legislation at the federal level, is going to have to be solved at the state and local level. In Illinois, we've solved all these problems. In Illinois, we've thankfully,
due to the efforts of a lot of us on this call, we have frankly elected people from the governor on down to lots of local officials who are ensuring that we are having, for example, local districts that are drawn in a fair manner. We have early voting. We have same-day voter registration. We have automatic voter registration. We have a lot of the components of SB1 and HB1, but we don't have that in the rest of the country. And frankly, if we don't get this solved now, we won't be able to get it solved, because this is our window of time. We have a very limited window before the midterms come, and we don't know whether these razor thin majorities we have in the House or the Senate are going to hold up. And if we don't have both of them, the chances of getting something like this passed are very low.
Renato, since we have a little bit of time, and I know Jared was going to talk about it, but do you know, for the filibuster, I mean, it's been around forever, but this approach where even the debate can be stopped, not by actually somebody talking for 24 hours, that's what everybody thinks about, but just by basically not allowing it to move on. How long has that been used, and did it just recently become a problem? Was it kind of always there and just not used very often?
No, there have been rules changes in recent decades. I mean, look, the filibuster in its current form was expanded, frankly, in the 50s and 60s. It was used a lot to push forward an agenda that was anti-Black, that was anti-minority during the civil rights era. And really, if you look at the number of filibusters and when they have, when they happened in the Senate, it's expanded dramatically over just the last 40, 50 years. And I will just say, I worked many years ago for Senator Paul Wellstone, back when he was one of the only progressives in the Senate. And back then, the Senate rules were such that whether there was a filibuster or not, really depended on, the will of a particular senator to defy leadership. And often there was at least some effort to ensure that the person was going to be up there speaking, even then, even if it wasn't necessarily required. So this was, 20 years ago, but it's changed in just the last 20 years. It's become such a normal thing for there to be filibusters that the number of it is just skyrocketed. And I think that the concern is just at this point, our nation really is not going to be able to have a functioning government if the filibuster is not reformed. Back when Paul was there, there was still some liberal Republicans or some conservative Democrats, because there wasn't a complete mapping of, conservative or right wings folks and Republicans. And now there's been such a shift since 1994, really, but it's accelerated since then, that we aren't able to get anything done without 60 votes. Unless you have a 60-vote Democratic majority, we're not going to be able to get anything done. And it's just, I think it's a problem for our country. And we have exceptions, by the way, already. We have an exception, for example, for the Supreme Court or for certain federal vacancies, right? So why not have an exception for, let's say, voting rights as well?
Thanks.
Renato, there's a question from Sandy from WISE. Sandy, do you want to ask it, or we could take a look at the chat?
Sure. My question is that I've heard that For the People Act does not stop some of the bills that are being passed across the country that would allow the state legislators to overturn the results of an election. And I'm wondering if this is true. And if it is true, if there's any work being done to correct that. I know it's a long shot to get the bill passed in the first place, but we want to make sure it has everything in it that we need. Thank you.
That's a great question, Sandy. A couple of things I just want to make sure everyone understands. Elections, just to explain why this is an issue. Elections in this country are run on the state level. They're not run federally.
Okay, that's an odd thing about our system. That's why we have certain states that are going to have high-tech voting systems and other states that have dimpled chads, right? Or why we have county by county differences, even within a particular state. And so that, because of that, we have different state election laws that are overseeing those states. And it is in fact the case that different states have different procedures. So, well, then why does the For the People Act do something about that? How does that solve that problem more generally? There's something in the Constitution called the Supremacy Clause that says that federal law trumps state law. So if there's federal law on something that the federal government has power to do, that can trump the state law that contradicts it. Well, on a whole variety of issues, whether it's election security, same-day voter registration, gerrymandering, whatever, there's all these provisions, specific provisions in the For the People Act that essentially make it so any contrary state law is overruled, so to speak. But that's not the case, to raise the point that you just made, which I thought was an excellent, what a savvy point. There's some really smart people here on this Zoom. Very savvy point. Which is that these efforts to say, well, we declare the election to be null and void in the state of Georgia. Let's just say, for an example, one state that the Trump put a lot of effort into. This does nothing to trump Florida, whether it's Georgia election law, Florida election law, Texas election law on those specific issues. So could there be a bill that's crafted to do that? Yes. That sets federal standards for the overturning of an election? Yes. But that's not this bill. Of course, this bill already does a heck of a lot of stuff, from DC statehood to gerrymandering to campaign finance reform to election security, so on and so forth. So it's pretty jam-packed with important things in it.
So to Sandy's point, do you know if anybody's working on that? I mean, is that just something nobody was expecting until these states started doing this?
I think that's right. I do think it's something that's unprecedented in American history, first of all. Secondly, one of the issues is just essentially that they're using laws that are actually on their face neutral laws, okay, to try to do something that's nefarious. In other words, if there actually is fraud in an election, actual fraud, not just Donald Trump saying so, we actually do want some investigation into that matter. You do want to have a situation where if, the mob is stuffing the ballot boxes in Chicago, we want something to be done about it, but we just don't want people to make it up and try to overturn an election when there's no evidence. Now, to be very fair about it, it has been a story in certain respect of our system working, right? Because there's a lot of federal judges and state judges across this country that did a remarkable job of holding the line on these Kraken lawsuits. We had a contempt hearing the other day. We had some Trump judges, notably former classmate of mine, Stephanos Bibas in the Third Circuit, the Trump appointee, saying that that these things are bogus. So in fact, that was a Pennsylvania federal lawsuit. So I do think that the courts, for example, have done a good job with these, but nonetheless, I don't think we ever want to be there again. I do think we have reason to be concerned. I think the other thing that is a related issue that this has nothing to do with is the certification process for electoral votes. That's something that really should be reformed as well. I think everyone should be concerned at what might have happened if you had different leadership and different composition of the House and the Senate when those votes were being tabulated on January 6th. So, a lot to be concerned about. I'll tell you, it's not over, right? Didn't we all feel like we worked so hard and then we could relax for a while? We're already seeing all the crazies talking about Speaker of the House, Donald Trump, and all this nonsense. And then we've got, of course, the concern that what if JD Vance decides that he wants to become Trump 2.0, or some other person who's an intelligent liar, right? A smarter and more capable than Trump, but equally nefarious. So we've definitely got to be concerned.
I was just reading the other day that there are some consequences for the attorneys who brought some of these suits that they knew were false. What protections are there, like in the courts, for attorneys who decide to take up these kind of cases? And are they being enforced? Is that like a state by state thing? Are there federal regulations, or is it just convention among attorneys?
Wow, this is another savvy question. I'm going to answer like hardball questions today.
I'm sorry.
No, it's not okay. It's a good one. It's a good one. It's a really savvy question. And here's the answer. Every state regulates and licenses its own attorneys. So I'm licensed in the state of Illinois. I'm licensed in the state of California as well. And I'm regulated by the Illinois State Bar and by the California State Bar. But the truth of the matter is that those state bar organizations do not engage in a lot of attorney review and discipline unless it's for things that are really nefarious in the practice of law, like stealing clients' money. That's a great example. If I'm stealing, like if you steal clients' money, you're going to get disbarred or suspended, or something very serious is going to happen. For a variety of other things, it's a lot harder. Okay, unauthorized practice of law, maybe something like that. Like you're not licensed to practice law, you hold yourself out as a lawyer. But for the most part, they're not policing all these ethical rules that are in place, including the ethical rules that say that you cannot make false or misleading statements in the course of a representation. You cannot mislead a court. You have a duty of candor to a tribunal, to a court, for example. All these things that would prohibit what they did. Now, the judge the other day, I think she, in holding that contempt proceeding, is going to enforce those rules and before her. And courts have the power, separate and apart from the state bar organization, to recognize and hold. They have something called an inherent contempt power. So they have the power to enforce rules in front of themselves. And one of them is, of course, that as officers of the court, that we're not supposed to be misleading the courts. We're not supposed to be lying to the courts. We're supposed to be not misusing or abusing the court system by filing things for any purpose other than seeking relief for our clients. In other words, I'm not supposed to file a lawsuit just because my client wants publicity or a headline or a tweet. And I think that's part of what she was trying to get at the other day in that hearing, is that they know full well that this is total garbage. There's nothing to it. And she's upset. Now, I will say this, a lot of people are hoping, I always get people ask me, so when's somebody going to jail for this? When people going to prison? When's Trump going to prison? And the reality is, and I've been saying this for years, no one ever, at least I think you guys listen to me, all my friends in here in DuPage listen to me, which is it's rarely going to happen. It's a lot harder than you might think. As somebody who spent a lot of years prosecuting white collar crime, and also spent a lot of years opposite of bad lawyers on the other side. It's really hard for there to be consequences. So these folks may have some consequences. It could, whether it's paying money or having to do some, whether it's community service or whatever. I mean, I had a guy, for example, in a very high profile trial, a lawyer take photos of the evidence and put it on Twitter during one of my trials, and where there's all these signs up, hey, don't take photographs and this and that. And the chief judge was not very happy about it, but I think the guy paid a fine. He had to do some service or something. I mean, they're not going to throw these lawyers in jail or something, but I do think maybe they might for a day or a week or something, but it's not going to be the kind of punishment that makes everyone feel good about themselves on this Zoom call. And I'm going to prepare you for that now. But it ruins your reputation unless you don't care about your reputation. Okay, no one's going to want to, if they Google, if I had this happen to me, whenever somebody wanted to hire me, they'd Google my name and be like, oh, Renato's that lawyer who the judge said is dishonest and is abusing the courts. Like for most lawyers, that would ruin their career. And so they don't want to have anything to do with it. And you can see the few legitimate lawyers who had their names on there, not Sidney Powell, but the actual people who care about their reputation, hired their own lawyers now, and they're all very concerned there. And I don't know if you noticed on that call, everyone was throwing each other under the bus, right? It was like, I didn't mean to sign it. I didn't read it. I don't know how my name got on there. I mean, yeah. No honor amongst thieves, right?
So at least a disincentive, to some extent.
I give that judge credit. Yeah, because she, I think,
Right.
realizes there's something that was the prosecutor should call general deterrence, which is you
Yeah.
punish one person and then everyone else follows suit. That's why sometimes you go after these big, rich, high-profile folks, where you're taking out some real estate mogul or some trader or whatever, you're going to get, you're going to let all the other rich moguls know that, Joe Blow went to prison, so I might be the next one. So in this case, even if it's just a reputational thing, it can have some.
So I have a question about people like Raffensperger in Georgia.
In Georgia. Mhm.
Yeah, so he is, touted as, a champion of democracy and fair elections. But in fact, he is deeply rooted in the voter suppression movement in Georgia. So
Right.
how long can, in your opinion, can we count on someone like him?
You can't.
No.
I mean, I don't think we can count on Republicans at all. I certainly am not. My message is not like, hey, let's work together with Republicans. Look, there's a lot of people, including the president, who have that message. That's not mine. I will just say that Mr. Raffensperger, to his credit, is not a liar. Okay, so when he was asked to certify an election as false and steal an election, he was not willing to commit a crime. So I give him credit. I don't think he's a criminal or a liar. And so I give him that level of credit. But certainly, Republicans have been trying to restrict votes for a long time. And they usually are targeting people of color, right? And so many Republicans, I'm not going to make a judgment on how many, who does or doesn't, but a lot of Republicans all over this country have been trying to do that for decades. And we've got to fight it. And unfortunately, part of the problem is, unlike Illinois, there haven't, in a lot of other states, we haven't taken over the state legislature. We haven't taken over the state senate. And the issue is really, we're sometimes too focused as a party on only the presidential or senatorial races. And so these state legislatures have the power to restrict voting, right? Like they did in Iowa next door. Now suddenly you don't have early voting. You don't have, many locations can't vote by mail. And the panacea to that, the answer to that is, frankly, we've got to have more movements like Indivisible. That we have a strong Indivisible DuPage. We need to have a strong Indivisible movement across the country that's going to get progressives elected and take over state legislatures. And this For the People Act's great just because we can impose national rules, but of course we got to overcome filibuster to do it. So there's that. All right, guys. I have to go. So is that okay?
Yeah, why don't we at this point review who we've met and give a quick shout out and a thank you to all of our speakers. I'm going to put their names and affiliations back out on the screen just as a reminder. So I know that I think all of the other three speakers have left already, but I wanted to make sure that I thanked everybody, Marzi, Christine, Jared, and Renato, for joining us tonight and talking about this very important and timely issue of voter suppression and what we can do about it as little olds ourselves, fighting in this big war, which is how kind of we need to view it in some ways. Please join us for our first official meeting in person next month. It'll be at the Scarce facility in Addison. Scarce is an award-winning environmental education nonprofit, that's a lot of words, dedicated to creating sustainable communities. They accomplish this through innovative and hands-on education programs for schools and organizations, demonstrating care for people and our natural resources through their reuse center, and engaging the broader public through community-wide events and programs. For over 30 years, Scarce has been implementing change to foster a more sustainable future. We will start promptly at 6:30, which is kind of unusual for meetings that we've been having pandemic-wise. So we want to make sure that everybody knows that the tour leaves at 6:30. If you would like to tour the facility with us. I know Scarce has been part of some of the recycling drives that our representatives, at least in our area, have run. I know I attended one by my state rep and senator that included Scarce as one of the recycling providers. So they are an interesting group that really tries to make a difference. So please join us next month. It is August, I'm sorry, here's the information, August 10th. And the address is 800 South Rawling Road in Addison, Illinois. And that information will also be up on all of our usual communications to you. So Facebook, website, and our weekly emails.
And Ursula, I did post the link to the event
Excellent.
in chat.
Excellent. Even better. So thank you very much for joining us tonight, and we hope to see you next month.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, everyone. This was really good.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm off to Medicare for All meeting now.
Thank you very much. This was great.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All righty.
Okay, everyone. That
We
was
still have,
good.
there's somebody on, Lori. I'm gonna,
I know her screen was gray for a long time, so
yeah,
I don't know.
I think I can put her in the waiting room and then, there we go. Okay.
Ha.
I can tell her.
Here we go. Very proper.
So
Diane,
good. We had a
Diane,
good
you can-
turnout.
Yeah,
I was
and you can
worried.
stop